In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Welcome to our second episode of Building Orthodox Culture. I'm your host, Christina Taylor. Today I'd like to talk about developing healthy relationships with other women. I think a lot of women today feel very lonely. Many of us don't have families that live nearby or that we can count on. Some of us have no family at all or have family that's very dysfunctional. And so I think there's a great lack of support that women maybe 100 years ago would have had. They would have been surrounded by aunts and cousins and grandmothers and great-grandmothers, great-aunts, sisters and cousins. And there would have been this big community of women to help and love and support one another. And we just don't have that now. I think many women feel very isolated and are trying to navigate their life, whether it's the early years of small children or the teenage years or empty nesters or heading into menopause, the death of parents. There's so many large life events that women are now facing alone without the help and the support of women who have already gone through those times. And so I just want to share with you some of the most important relationships that I've had. The first thing I'd like to talk about is a need for a grandmother. If you don't have a granny, you need to get one. I was very blessed to get to know my grandmother before she died. When I was young, we didn't have much of a relationship because of the dynamics in our family that had nothing to do with me. But as I got older and I lived across the country from her, I really tried to develop a relationship with her. It was awkward at first, but through letters and through calling her on the phone, we slowly began to get more and more comfortable with each other, and we talked more and more about gardening, about what I was doing in my life with my children. And I was really grateful that I got to know her a bit before she died. And while I love my grandmother, she was never really the type of grandmother that I think we all are probably looking for. Again, not her fault. I don't blame her for that, but it wasn't a relationship where there was a lot of love and kind of your movie or your storybook grandmother. So over the last few years, I found a new grandmother. She's an older lady in our community, and we just hit it off. Sometimes I go to visit her, and we can talk for hours. We talk about our shared interest of education and helping young children in particular. And we come from similar backgrounds, and so I'm able to just sit by her and listen to her tremendous life story that's taken her all over the world and through so much hardship and pain, and her finding the faith. And it's just a tremendous blessing and honor to sit by her and listen to these stories. And through this slowly listening and getting to know each other, I think we really have come to love one another as grandma and granddaughter. She even calls me her granddaughter sometimes. And I have to tell you, there was this one time when she didn't come to church because she was ill, and I was sent by someone to take her something after church. And I walk into her house, and I've recently started learning how to sew for about the last year, and I was wearing a shirt that I had sewn and a scarf that I had knitted for myself last year. And I walked in, and I was very proud to show her my new little shirt that I made. And she just got the biggest smile on her face, and she clapped her hands, and she said, "Oh, Christina, I'm so proud of you, and I'm so proud of all the sewing you've learned to do this year. It's just, you're doing a magnificent job." I could tell Barbara had totally gone into her second grade teacher mode of laying on the love and the just pouring that love into me in that way. And I have to admit, in that moment, I felt like a second grader. I felt like a little 8-year-old just standing there, beaming back to my teacher, to my grandmother, who I could tell loved me so much. And to have her, as silly as it sounds, when I'm 46, to have her say, "I'm so proud of you," was just tremendous. And it occurred to me that I don't think I've had that in so long. An older woman just loving me in that way. And I was so grateful for her. And it wasn't about puffing me up, because my sewing skills are actually quite low, but it was her love. She was being completely honest in her praise and in her encouragement. And I was there for it. I felt just wonderful. So we just stood there staring at each other with big goofy smiles on our faces, and I was so grateful for her in that moment. And then I have another granny. I have another granny who is a Russian lady who I met when I believe I was 20 when I met her, and we briefly worked together. And she was learning to drive, and we rode to church with her, and this was a lady who had just this amazing life in Moscow in communist times, growing up under the Soviet regime. But to sit at her feet and to listen to the stories of her childhood, and this deep piety that she has as the daughter of people who have been Orthodox for hundreds of years, extremely faithful people whose lives seem like something you'd read out of the life of a saint. And so I met her when I was very young, about 25 years ago, and now I had the blessing to reconnect with her. And when I go on a certain trip every few months or year, I run into her again. And so she invited me over with my sons, and she made us a little ice cream. And she just sat us down and again told us more and more about her life. And it was such a blessing. And every time I go there now and see her, even if it's only 5 minutes, I just saw her last week, and I walked her out to her car. She had her cane, and she had too many things in her hand. So I said, "Come, let me walk you out." And she said, "No, I can do it." I said, "No, I don't have a grandmother. Let me be your granddaughter just for a few minutes, and I can walk you out." And she smiled, and she let me walk her out, and she again began telling me just 5 minutes worth of such stories, such love for her parents and for her grandparents, and a tremendous blessing. So I'm begging you, if you don't have a grandmother, and maybe even if you do, go find another one. Go find an old lady at church who you connect with, and just sit and listen. Another friendship I would encourage everybody to develop would be a friendship with a young mother. Especially if you've already been a young mother, you know that those first few years can be so isolating. It's difficult to switch from being a carefree young lady, either in a job or at college, to all of a sudden being at home every day and having these wonderful children, but very small children who need so much care, and who don't offer you any conversation throughout the day. I remember those first 4 or 5 years were just incredibly silent in our home. And I would sing with them and read books to them, but if I wasn't doing the talking, it was pretty quiet in our home. And this was a really good thing for me. Day after day, it can be very difficult for a young woman to get used to that. And so if you would just reach out to these young women and remind them that you're there, and if they need to just chat with an adult for a few minutes, that you're there to listen to them and encourage them, and to let them know it's normal to feel that way in the beginning, and that they'll get used to it. And as their children grow and there's more conversation and um, busyness in the house, it gets easier. Just like we need relationships with older women who have so much to offer us, so much guidance and love, and we need to reach out to the mothers and other women who are closer to our stage in life. It's also really important, I think, to reach out to the young ladies, whether they're young girls at 12 or 13, or high school girls. There's been several over the years that I've developed friendships with. One was a young girl who was in the junior high youth group at our church, and I was briefly the junior high youth group leader with someone else. And there was a small friend group of girls who I got along with really well, and one in particular who I would just try to check in on every few years as we moved apart and as she was growing up. And even now, she still comes to visit, and I get to see her wonderful family, and now she's more like a friend. But on the same, she's a young mother and I'm an older mother. We're more on the same stage of life than we were when we were both very young. But what a blessing to get to know her and to be a part of her life. And I know that she appreciates that I was there, and that I was just interested in her and her life and what she was doing. And I have a new young girl who is 12 or 13 and who's my little sewing buddy, and I'm learning to sew and she's learning to sew at home. So we bring each other our little projects, and we say, oh, here's what I did this week. And she's a much better sewist than I am, actually. Does tremendous work. But at church she'll come up to me and she'll say, did you make your shirt? Or did you make this? Or here's what I made this week. And it's just another way to, by sharing our life with one another, it's another way to pour our love into one another and to say to her, I love you. I'm here. I care about you. What you think about interest me. You interest me. And it's not forced. It's a very natural friendship that we have. And I hope that just grows as she gets older. And I hope as she gets older that as she begins to go through difficult times in our lives, as we all do, that she knows she has a friend in me. Doesn't matter if she's 13 or 23 or 33, that we're still friends. That bond was made over a shared hobby, but that it grew and grew, and we listened to one another and we shared. And so if she ever needs something, she knows she can call. And I hope that all the young ladies that I've reached out to over the years know that. And some of them have called and asked about things they were struggling with. And that's such a blessing to me, to just know that they had someone. And of course, they all had very loving parents. But sometimes a young girl needs another voice besides her parents, not in opposition to, but complementary to her parents, saying, yes, your parents are right about this. Yes, you should be careful in this situation. Or just to give them, your love, and to say, I don't know what you should do, but I'm praying for you and I love you. And so it's very easy to ignore the young women in our lives, but just like the moms and the elderly, all women, we desperately need this support from one another, no matter how old we are. And lastly, I think the most important relationships I've developed with women over the years has been with two different abbesses, with an abbess in the Russian tradition and an abbess, or Yerandisa in the Greek tradition. I met them both when I was 18. And looking back, I realize now how patient they were with me as a young person with so many questions and so much ignorance. But they were always there. If I had a question, I knew that I could go and I didn't have to be embarrassed. I could just lay my questions out to them. And they wouldn't only give me advice, but they would encourage me and they would pray for me. And so I know that these ladies, these women have been praying for me for 25 years. And when I got married, one gave me advice about proper Orthodox weddings and marriage. And the other gave us this beautiful icon of Saints Joachim and Anna. To this day, it's one of the most precious things that we have, because I know it was given with love and with prayer and with so much desire for my husband and I to build a strong family. Those very deep relationships, and we don't have to see each other every week, but even if I went every 6 months or sometimes every year, I know that they were there. And they were there for me when my parents were dying and when we lost our house, and these periods of time where there was so much turmoil that we didn't know what to do, through church splits, through loss of spiritual fathers more than once. To have this consistent love and support of these holy women was incredible to me. I can't imagine my spiritual life now without those relationships. So again, if you've never been to a monastery, if you don't have a relationship with an abbess somewhere, I can't recommend this enough, to go and to get to know them so they can pray for you, so you have somewhere to go where you feel comfortable and you can ask any question you want to ask. And you see the example of their life, how they live in simplicity and modesty. I think you really get an idea for what it means to be a holy woman when you're around them. You feel elevated, and your own desires and your own vision of what you can be as a woman is elevated and broadened. So how can you find all these different types of women in your life? Well, I think with everything, you always have to start with prayer and just pray that God sends you the relationships that you need in your life. And that's going to be different for everyone. If you have a mother or a grandmother that you're already close to, maybe you just need some young friends, or an abbess, or a holy woman to develop a friendship with. But if you don't have older family, maybe you need a granny or a mother figure. So just pray that God sends whoever you need to you. Another thing I would suggest is to definitely go outside of your age group. There's a man named Andrew Pudwa that I often listen to for homeschool help. He's a traditional Catholic homeschooler, and he does a lot of seminars on writing, but he also covers a lot of other topics, more general homeschooling topics. And I remember in one talk, he talked about how when children are in a single age group, so you have like all 9-year-olds together, the entire group will sink down to the vocabulary and the behavior of the lowest child in the group. And he was talking about this in terms of public school versus families and homeschools. But I've noticed the same thing happening with women, that if you're in a group of women who are generally the same age group, the conversation, the topics, the manners all seem to drop to the lowest level. And what Andrew Pudwa says about a mixed age group of children is that everybody in the group will actually rise. So their vocabulary will go up. And this is why young children will want to impress the older children, so they will act older. They will bring their manners and their vocabulary up. The older children go into mom and dad mode, where they feel like they are responsible for the younger children. So they actually go up in their attitudes and vocabulary. And what I've noticed with groups of women is the same thing, that if you introduce, let's say, a few teenagers to a group of women, but all of a sudden the women want to be a good example for the teenagers, right? And the teenagers want to say something intelligent to the moms or to this group of women. And so they will be more thoughtful. It won't be all silliness. And so you see, each group is actually benefited by the other. And so I think we really need to get away from thinking that your only friends are, or the people that you're the most friends with are people in your own age group. You can have tremendous friendships with people who are younger or older than you as well. And it will actually encourage you both to be better. And finally, just a very practical note is that, life is busy, and it's very easy to let developing friendships fall to the wayside. I recently, a few years ago, went through a pretty stressful time in my life, and after about 6 months in, I realized how isolated I had become due to the stress, that I didn't want to talk about the situation. And some of my friends were actually involved in this situation, so I couldn't talk with them about it. And I realized that if I had just reached out to other friends on a regular basis, that I think my stress level would have been a lot less in this situation. But I let it get pretty bad through isolating myself. And so now I've made it a point to every week try to reach out to somebody. So that's either calling a friend who lives far away. Most of my friends that are my age actually do live in other states. And so making a point to call them. So if I have 5 or 6 friends that live all around the country, then I'm calling every one of them maybe every 4 to 6 weeks. Then I try to go and visit somebody at their house. Often this is my granny, because she lives close, and she's older, so she has a hard time getting out of the house. And finally, I try to invite someone to go out. And so a mom who maybe has a lot of little kids, inviting her, out for dinner one night or over to our house to visit for a little while and let her get out of her house. If I kind of rotate through these things every week, then I find that I feel more connected. I'm reaching out with purpose. And I just enjoy the company of these women tremendously. But I have to make it on purpose or it won't get done. So I would encourage you all to go out and find a granny, find some sisters, find some little sisters, and if you haven't already been to a monastery, please go and check one out. It may turn your whole life around to have that kind of a relationship. Thanks for listening, and God bless you.